So if you were not with us yesterday, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker. Steve Cabano is the president of Pathfinder. He is a former CII executive committee leader. He was the chair of the CII board. He serves on plenty of research teams, quite qualified to tell you about CII's tools. So I'll go ahead and with that, pass it over to Steve, and he will continue where we left off yesterday.
All right, thanks, Jenny, and welcome back those that participated yesterday, and welcome to any new participants. So just to recap what we talked about yesterday, and hopefully everybody can see the screen. So day one we went through an introduction. I'll give you a brief overview of that here for day two as well. And then we talked about kind of the project assurance overview, right? So taking roughly 5 of the CII tools and research efforts, and developing a kind of an owner project assurance program, right? That kind of says, okay, if we were going to choose a handful of items to focus on and implement, what might they be? So we started off with a new research effort that'll be launched at this year's annual conference, and that was the capital efficiency and capital effectiveness. Then we ended the day yesterday talking about the project definition rating index. Today we'll do the construction readiness assessment, the project health indicator, and planning for commissioning and startup. So hopefully, and we'll show that diagram again on how all of these kind of interface against your typical capital project, planning and delivery process. Again, I'll just do this real quick, but why this program? People struggle with sometimes trying to figure out of the 1,000 plus, it's probably up to 1,100, 1,200 different research efforts and documents, where to start. So where do you get the most bang for the buck? And this is just one approach to what those might be. Why now? If you take a look at the capital spend for a lot of organizations, it's increasing again. We've got a lot of shuffling around of resources, within organizations or across organizations. And then also the kind of some of the new members to CII, and so kind of introducing them to these kind of five practices that is easy to implement. Jenny mentioned, and I'll give you a little bit of background on the next slide about me, that we've been involved with CII for many years. We are a registered provider to provide kind of oversight and guidance on a lot of these tools. We also deliver CII training as part of the program, and we've actually implemented a lot of these across our client base. So we've had experience of actually using the tools, and actually several of us sat on some of the research efforts that created these tools. So, obviously we only have an hour left on the overall program. So we've got 3 tools to cover. There'll be a quick overview, roughly 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes on each one. And then just kind of an open discussion at the end. But, that these are readily available tools, right? So in other words, you don't need to customize them. You don't have to have now you can, but you don't have to, a big consulting effort or anything like that to implement them. They can be pretty much implemented right away and off the shelf. So that's what we hope to kind of come across here. Jenny mentioned a little bit about myself. This is a little bit more, and you can see some of roughly the last 8 years or so of participation with CII, and goes back beyond that as far as participating in some research efforts and so on. And, some of the background even outside of CII. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction. As I said yesterday, when we looked at, the kind of the initiation of these tools, we started off with pursuing the capital efficiency, or the capital efficiency, capital effectiveness. And that's a tool that's actually being developed right now to be launched at the annual conference. I'll give you another pitch for the annual conference here at the end. So that's kind of feeding the pipeline within the overall process. So how do we even get into phase 2 so that we choose the right projects or the right opportunities, and then kind of the rest of the tools look at, how do we execute those efficiently and effectively. We went through the series of project definition rating index tools, of which there's, again, 8 or 9, I lose count sometimes, and how you can actually use that to help you in getting through those FEL phases, right? So choosing the best overall concept to meet the objectives, but then also maturing that from a standpoint of, the deliverables, and making sure you've got the right team to be able to develop that front end as efficiently as effectively. What we are going to go into now is this construction readiness assessment. This is a more recently developed tool, before the project definition rating index, but not as recent as the efficiency and effectiveness tool. But probably about 4 years ago or so, the construction readiness assessment was completed. What the focus of the readiness assessment is all about is, are you ready to mobilize and start construction? So it's a little bit further down look at the project. Remember, the PDRI's main focus is authorization of the project at the end of phase 3. And you can use it earlier in preparation for that assessment. Construction readiness is more used in execution to evaluate roughly 15 different areas, 16 if you add kind of the additional factors. And are you ready to go and mobilize your folks to the field? Just because your schedule says so doesn't mean you should go and charge ahead and start getting into construction. You've got to take a look at things like, do you have the right tools and equipment ready? Have you put in place things like your change management approach and kind of your human resource factors, right? Are you ready from a standpoint of your engineering deliverables? One is focused on kind of making sure the materials and equipment are there so that if you do mobilize, people can do the work. The other is kind of looking at, are the engineering deliverables executed to the level of detail needed for that same team to go and execute the work as efficiently as they can, right? It also takes a look at things like commissioning, right? And that backward pass. We talked yesterday a little bit about, AWP and how, these are not AWP tools, but they align with the AWP process. So the commissioning aspect of this tool set or this questionnaire set is basically saying, have we really defined what the requirements are from a commissioning and startup standpoint so that we can plan construction accordingly, right, in the same sequence, so that we order things in the same sequence, and that we design and deliver the engineering deliverables in that backward pass type of an approach. So it kind of starts from commissioning back through construction, through procurement into engineering. And then we have project control factors as well. So each one of these, you can see in the boxes, it says, how many questions there are related to each one of these items. So if you take, the tools and equipment as an example, there's 13 different categories that it looks at within that section alone, right? And then you do have this additional factors at the end that if you've got something that's very specific to your project, right, you can add those factors as measurement requirements within the tool set as well. But every one of these, again, it's a very simple tool to use. It's done as an assessment. Now, we recommend that you actually start to apply this in front-end loading, right? So that you know what those things are in preparation for you to mobilize in the field. Ultimately, you're doing the last assessment when you actually get to that mobilization to make sure that you are ready to hit the field. But you can kind of see how you enter into the screen, and if you want to get into a certain area, double click on the category. What comes up in that category is your series of questions, right? Now, this is a little different than the PDRI. If you remember, the PDRI had a gradient, right? You had kind of 0 to 5, where 0 was not applicable. 1 is you're done that deliverable. 5 means you haven't even started, and you can kind of go in between, and the PDRI matters got into much more detail around what those different 2s, 3s, and 4s were for each of the 72 questions. In the construction readiness assessment, it's a little more simple, right? It's a yes or no answer. Well, first of all, it might be not applicable or applicable. But after that, it's a yes or no, right? So as an example, if you are, let's say one of the requirements is a resource loaded critical path method schedule at, before you mobilize. So everybody kind of knows how many people for how long and so on and so forth. Well, if I've got a critical path method schedule, but it's not resource loaded, the answer to this question is no, right? And then what it does is any one of these questions, I think we've got stakeholder managements up here right now. If for any reason you mark down a no, you're also asked to then say why. Why is it a no? What's deficient in that particular factor? And then who's responsible to kind of close that, right? So at the end of the day, what kind of comes out of this is a score, but also kind of an action list, right? That says, okay, to get yourself more ready for execution or for construction, here's the things that are gaps, here's the people that are responsible, and here's the date in which we want that closed, right? So all of the different categories, those 15 or 16 different categories, have a worksheet very similar to this. And again, every one of these has a definition about it, and then you obviously just go in and say non-applicable or yes or no from an answer standpoint. So these are as an output, as I mentioned before, the action list, right? So if once you go through the analysis, if there were things that are missing, it'll identify to which category that was, and then identify what the action is, right? Close the example I gave you, resource load that critical path method schedule, because that was the deficiency or the gap within that tool. So that's what it comes up with, something that looks like this, which it says, complete missing section of the plan, who's responsible, what's the date, and any additional notes. So again, you can spit this out, and it has a complete action list. But the ultimate, output of this is a score, similar to the PDRI. But in this case, you've got a dial that, in this case, it shows a 78. And in the analysis of the details behind all of this, that if you're less than a 75 score, you're probably not ready for mobilization. If you're in that 75 to 80 category, you might question whether you should hit the field or not. If you're greater in the green area there, that 80, you should be pretty good, right? You're in a good shape to kind of mobilize. You may still have some things that you want to address, but you shouldn't hesitate too much to move forward. What it also does is it charts, again, a target versus where you actually are. So in this particular spider diagram, there's the 16 factors. In this case, there's the 15. And the black is the target. That's where you'd like to be, there or greater, in the analysis. The green is the report that you just ran, right? So obviously, in this particular case, this project's not ready for prime time, not ready to hit the field. There's some work that needs to be done. Now, if you've done the analysis early enough, you have time to kind of adjust and reevaluate. And you can reevaluate. I think there's a diagram in here that shows multiple assessments of the same project and how you've improved over time. But that's why I was saying that you might want to do a first one near the end of FEL, maybe a second one while you're still in detailed design, and then the third one right before you try to mobilize, in effort to make sure that you've got time to fix any of the potential deficiencies. So here's one that was then mapped against a second evaluation, right? If you see the review 1 is the green, review 2 is the yellow, orange, and the target's the black. So, pretty good scores in a lot of areas. I'd still worry a little bit about here, stakeholder management, right? That's kind of below where you'd really like to be. And maybe even that project control factors, probably a little light in where we need to be, and maybe even in the tools and equipment. but it'll kind of give you some guidance on whether you feel confident, or the tool suggests that you feel confident to mobilize and then have efficient. The reason for this, by the way, is that if again you take an overall project and kind of the amount of effort involved in our engineering, procurement, construction. Historically, 40–50% of your costs are probably going to be in the construction phase, right? Another 40% or so in materials, and then the remaining is in the engineering side of things. So if you can make construction as efficient as possible, there's a huge value proposition for the overall effort, right? And that's kind of the focus of why we want to make this as our execution phase as efficient as possible. So the value proposition here, right, is to create that checklist. There's 200 and some odd questions if you fill out the whole assessment. Again, a yes or no kind of answer, very straightforward. You don't have to do too much analysis. If something is deficient in one of those questions, it's a no with an action to what needs to be closed for it to become a yes. And then it can be used to track the project as it moves through the different phases, and it allows you to map one assessment to the next assessment and so on, and see the progress of how well you're preparing for the execution or the construction phase. So that's kind of that third tool, right? So now we've got kind of making sure we got the right portfolio going into the program. We've got our assessment of the front end phases with our PDRI, and now we've got an assessment of how well we're ready for the big money phase, which would be the construction aspect. Again, we'll save the questions until the end here. So let's move on to I guess it's the fourth tool, but the second tool for today, and the project health indicator, right? So again, this it's primarily focused on phase 4, right? So our detailed engineering, procurement, construction, but you can start it in your define stage, or the detailed scope phase, which is your FEL3, right? So this is where we're going to focus the next several minutes of the presentation. So again, research effort was really to kind of take a look at what are some of the other factors. This is to support, it's to augment your project control systems, right? So if you've got a very strong cost and schedule baseline setting, and then control tools and so on, this is in addition to that, right? So it kind of asks I'll call it the human type of characteristics and so on, that through another, again, questionnaire. These are all assurance tools, right? So they're really kind of taking an outside look into the project and looking for opportunities on how to improve. So you notice the second to the last bullet is similar to all the other tools. If there's an identified deviation or a gap, the intent is to take action, right? And that's what the overall tool is meant to achieve. So what we're trying to do here is to capture issues before they become a negative impact on our project, right? So we're looking at the kind of those leading indicators that can help in predicting project success or project health, right? And if we can identify them early enough, then we can correct them, right? To do the kind of the preventative aspects, right? So be more proactive, and hopefully, it ultimately helps our projects meet our cost and schedule expectations. So what we're trying to do is to minimize things like you look here, project team is experiencing high turnover rate, so kind of a rotation of resources, which historically, and you look at a lot of benchmark results, that becomes an issue, right? Project team losing confidence in the accuracy and validity of some of the project control information. If we can catch that early, kind of correct that, make sure we got the right inputs, then we have more confidence in that tracking of our typical project control information. we've got disconnects in kind of our owner and contractor teams, right? Are we schedule driven? Are we making decisions in a timely manner? So on and so forth. And then the PM is lacking, if we're looking at leadership here, right? Some experience and skills. So these are just a couple of the areas that you might want to measure to again, it's to reinforce that project is set up and can execute to its commitments, right? Its cost and schedule parameters. So again, the way this is organized, similar to some of the other tools, is it's a series of questions, right? So you see this one here, the project team is lacking the necessary expertise, experience, breadth, depth to successfully execute the project, right? And this is done through a facilitated effort. And we say, okay, yeah, no, it's a serious issue, or no, I think we're very well staffed with the right level of experience and so on. And you can keep moving down the line with these questions. The project team has experienced a high turnover rate and instability of team members. Again, no, we're in pretty good shape there, so it's not a big issue. It might be a 4 or 5, right, minor to none. Or no, it's just a constant turnstile of resources in and out of our project. So it could be a 1 or a 2. All right. And then ultimately, there's the leading indicators impact on safety, and you can kind of see some of the ones here that have the highest weighting. Again, they're weighted differently based on the research that was done. So each of the categories has behind the scenes a different weighting. But ultimately, what you end up with, and this first one are they're cross-referenced, right? In other words, there's a whole series of questions, but when you kind of look at how they interact with each other, these are the ones, what are they, 5 different items here that impact safety the most. These are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items that impact on quality the most and are weighted accordingly. And then this is 6 or 7 categories here, the leading indicators for things like schedule and schedule delays, right? And again, they're weighted accordingly. But ultimately, you end up with a kind of a scorecard, if you want, that after you go through the analysis, it gives you these, again, I think they call them radio dials, of where you stand. And again, you want to stay within, hopefully you're in the green, but if you're in the yellow, there may be some action that needs to be taken. And definitely if you're in the red, that's an area that you're going to need to kind of put a little more focus on, because it's deficient based on the input that you're getting from the project team from a health standpoint. All right, and then it has different levels here. So when you take a look at kind of your overall status, just use this one as an example. We've got an issue around alignment, right? And that's kind of owner contractor, maybe not totally in agreement, or maybe all the project team members aren't in alignment as far as what are the highest priorities for our project. The other end of the spectrum, you've got kind of safety, right? It seems like safety is well understood. It seems to be well practiced. We're in pretty good shape on the safety side of things. Another area of concern in this particular example would be team building and maybe even project controls, right? Where the team building might be correlated with that alignment issue, right? That we need to make sure that we've got that team. First of all, the project drivers and priorities well documented, well understood, and then we might need to get that team totally in agreement with all of that through some kind of a team building effort and so on. And then align our project controls accordingly to track those things, because again, what gets measured gets fixed typically. So if maybe my project controls isn't totally aligned, let's say I'm a schedule driven project and I've got team members that are saying, no, I think I got beat up last time on costs, and I'm not going to let costs, I'm going to do everything to save costs, even if it takes longer. Well, that's a misalignment to what the business objectives might be. So I might want to put additional controls on the schedule side of things because of the importance of schedule. So it starts, as I said before, this allows us to kind of have a different lens into our project control systems that, again, starts to get to some of those human issues and alignment type of discussions. Okay, you can tailor it, right, if you want to, but again, it's one of those that is kind of off the shelf. It does have some qualitative, quantitative type measures, but it's not a replacement for your cost control and your schedule control and resource control and so on. It's to augment those things. It tries to kind of assist in predicting some of the deficiencies to get project outcomes to where we want to be, and then hopefully you get that level of transparency that allows you to take action and maybe fix some of those things. And we talked about whether it's an alignment issue or so on. The dials at the bottom are different from what the previous one. But you can do this just like in the construction readiness assessment in intervals, right? So you can kind of see I might be deficient in a certain area. You come back at kind of the next phase and say, okay, did we improve on those items? We've done this on using it as a reporting process as part of your typical reporting. It's done on a monthly basis. It does not take that long to go through the questionnaire and kind of get this level of transparency. All right. So quick overview of the tool, but it is kind of again another lens to look at project execution. It can be used in the design, the definition or scope development phase 3. But historically, or what it was really designed for, was project execution, so detailed engineering, procurement, and construction. I mentioned a number of times it's this cross check, if you want, or validation of your typical project control metrics, and it does allow for kind of progress measurement that goes along with, as I explained already, that it can be used as just part of your monthly status reports, right? Where an independent, again, this should be done through somebody that's not involved in the project team, right? Doesn't have to be a consultant, but if you're creating this project assurance kind of group, this is something that they would facilitate. So they come in with a cold set of eyes and ask the questions and see how that project team is kind of from a human resource standpoint and alignment standpoint, how they're doing from a execution standpoint. All right, so that's the 5th tool. And the last one here is planning for commissioning and startup. Now again, if you look at the chart that we've been using, oh yeah, okay. So planning and commissioning and startup might be the tail end of my design and construction phase, right? So it's the point in time where we're gonna go from kind of a project to operations, right? From mechanical completion to handover and acceptance. But it doesn't start at in execution. It actually starts way up in kind of that, even when you're looking at concepts. But once you've selected the best concept, it's what are the conditions that are required to start this concept up effectively. And this gets into, again, some of that AWP activity that we're talking about, that if you go all the way back to commissioning and startup, that may drive how construction has to be sequenced to support efficient commissioning and startup, which might drive how procurement, how things are ordered to support construction, to support commissioning and startup, all the way back to engineering and how that's done. So that's why you see the arrow diagram here be extended beyond just where commissioning and startup would be done. It's much more in the planning phase. And the tool, what the research effort uncovered is it's not just a number of deliverables. There's all sorts of things that have to be designed in here. an engineering standpoint, from an execution standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, to make the commissioning and startup efficient and effective, right? So we've got case study after case study that says you can get to mechanical completion or substantial completion on your project, which might be 95% complete, and then it takes forever to get that last 5%. And a lot of times it's because this isn't planned out well, right? We've got disconnects between our construction activity and our operations activity, or we didn't engage operations early enough for what it might require to accept the asset at the time to accept it. So there's a lot of different things that can impact the actual operations acceptance of a project. And the ultimate goal from an owner's standpoint is not completing the project, right? The ultimate goal, actually the ultimate goal, is you're producing revenue from the capital that you deployed, right? Now, how do you get there? You gotta get operations to accept this facility and to get it up to speed. Right, and how do we do that? We got to make sure that we hit mechanical completion, in an environment that then we can start the commissioning and startup activity that hands it off to operations as efficiently as possible, and then we go all the way back through that chain that we talked about before. So the tool has created a map, and these are where the kind of the critical success factors map over time. Now, the difficulty with this diagram is that you look at the process at the top, right? This isn't our typical phase 1 through phase 5, right? So this is broken out a little differently. Here, front-end engineering. So this here is our phase 3 in our process. This here is phase 2, right? So kind of when you're mapping this commissioning and startup process across the project delivery process, you got to do a little bit of juxtapositioning. Then detailed design is really the first part of execution, right? And then you got construction, which is execution, and then commissioning, startup, and then operations. So operations would be phase 5 in our diagram. But you can see there's the 16 different elements, if you want, or factors that we need to make sure are well designed, well thought out, built into the overall strategy. And that starts all the way back in our front end loading with the idea that we want to make this commissioning and startup activity as efficient as possible. So there's every one of these factors has a definition, and then it has measurement requirements that go along with it. Right, so this is commissioning and startup leadership continuity, that we're not changing the roles, through the process. System milestone acceptance criteria and deliverables. Do we know what those requirements are? And you can go through, with more detail each one of these. But then each one of these different success factors also has kind of, okay, what are you trying to get out of that, right? And there may be multiple, right? So this, let me go back a slide here. This, commissioning startup leadership continuity actually has 2 kind of measurement, activities, right? The commissioning startup manager was assigned at the start of front-end engineering. Really? Yeah. Right, because if we need to understand how how complex or simple commissioning and startup might be, we need that all the way back when we're starting our engineering, right? And then they're maintained throughout the process and not changing that leadership, which may change kind of direction and so on. A second factor there, or indicator of achievement, might be the you've got that. That individual can represent operations, right? That they're not just the next warm body, right? In front end, they are the person that is responsible to take acceptance of this facility at the end of the day. That's hard to do, right? I mean, it's easy to write down, but it's hard to do because a lot of times operations doesn't see a project as real. Well, a lot of times they don't see it real until it's actually coming out of the ground. but they definitely don't see it real until it's fully authorized. So you've gotten approval for execution. And now you're asking them to participate in the front end when, you know, their main task is to keep operations keep that facility running. So how do you got to work that issue, right, to make sure you're getting the right people in those early phases so that you're setting the project off in the right direction, with a focus on the commissioning and startup. And the rest of these activities, or the success factors, are aligned in a very similar manner, right? So you see that we come down here, systems engineering during feed, right? And there's four different categories. There's also an aspect of the tool that I'm not going to go into now, but there's, kind of the top 30. There's a lot of different, I forget how many actual factors there are in here. But if you wanted to take the top grouping, just focus on that top 30 indicator, and that's what the team kind of identified as, critical items. So these are kind of lessons learned, right? That are also part. You see the continuum of information on we're just using this leadership continuity, right? What are some of the problems with achieving that success factor, right? We got very long projects, right? So you see lengthy duration of the project from project planning through the end of startup. It could be, if you got a project that lasts for 5-6 years, can you overcome that barrier, right? And what are some of the techniques you might implement to do that? The continuity, routine promotions, retirements, and so on, right? So this is, are we getting the person that'll stay there the whole time? Do they truly understand the importance of their input into that front end? Remember, this is leadership through the the front end part all the way through execution. There's not a program for people to really understand that you're going to be asked to participate through the whole life cycle of a project, not just at the commissioning and startup phase. So that may be a barrier that we have to overcome. And then can we fund to have these individuals involved early in the project, either from a project standpoint or the operations standpoint. So again, every one of these critical success factors has a series of, go back a slide here, the indicators for achievement, and then further to that, the barriers that you might have to overcome. So it's trying to use some historical lessons learned to say, if you want this to really work effectively, make sure these things are addressed, and overcoming these barriers. And here's just another one for, system milestone acceptance and some of the barriers that might exist there as well. And there's the third one. All right. Now, in addition to all of that, there is I'll call it a massive RACI chart that is included in this tool. Beginning of my career, the API, the American Petroleum Institute, used to have a commissioning and startup checklist that they offered to the industry to kind of be as a starting point to, here's your checklist, right? Here's all the things that should be included in your commissioning and startup activities. And then here's the RACI part of that, which was, okay, who's going to do the work, who's going to observe the work, who authorizes it, who approves it, so on and so forth. And they created a starting point, but then they stopped maintaining it because people were saying, they were using it as purely a checklist and not a think list, right? They would say that, okay, if I do this for my project, then I'm good for commissioning and startup. That was never the intent, right? The intent was it was a starting point, and then the specific utilizer of that tool should modify it, tweak it, and make it very project specific. So in essence, what the research team did here was try to come up with something similar to that, since it wasn't being maintained by API anymore. And what you have here is a massive checklist of think list of commissioning and startup activities that are down on the left-hand side. I know it's impossible to read here, And then across the top, you have the different players within the the project team. And this could be a commissioning and startup team, it could be your contractor, it could be owner's operations team and maintenance folks, and so on and so forth. And they're all identified across the top. And what this matrix does is it takes kind of those leadership roles, project management, construction management, and so on, and cross-references them by phase on, what are some of the things that have to get done, and how many times are you accountable for something versus responsible? And for those of you who are not familiar with the RACI concept, the accountable person is the person that's there to make sure that it happens, it gets done, and it gets done in a quality manner. They don't necessarily have to be the doer, but they're there to make sure that it happens, right? The R are the doers, right? So when you look at this, you got, from a construction standpoint, there's 44 accountabilities that happen throughout the process. There's 28 in pre-commissioning, there's 28 in commissioning, and so on, by resource, right? By project manager, so on. And all this is a subset of the details that come out of the overall RACI chart that we saw before. So if I just take construction management as an example, this is a subset of that whole big RACI. And it says that, okay, from a construction management accountable activities, here's the subset of that construction has to lead, right? And lead being make sure it happens, right? Whether the contractor's doing this or the owner construction team is doing this, those would be the R's. This is just the accountability that construction has to make sure that happens. And there's a breakdown of all of this within so this is construction management on the responsibility side of things, right? So what is construction going to have to do versus what construction in the previous slide has to oversee and make sure that happens. And there's a complete breakdown. Here's another example of the same thing with operations, right? So you see a lot more because they're the recipient of all of this work. These are the things that they need to be involved in and make sure it happens, because these are accountable activities. And then these are the responsible activities from a operations standpoint, right? So there's I think 123 different functions or activities that are included in this big RACI chart. And then really kind of are the people really coming to the table and fulfilling their requirements is part of that assurance review, right? And these things happen starting in FEL 3, going all the way through execution, and then obviously the handover to operations and maintenance. All right, so why this tool? Well, it's I'll go back to what I said before, right? It's a struggle sometimes when you can get to that 95% complete and you can't get the ball over the end line. So why? It's because a lot of these activities are not well thought out, not planned, and it starts a churn process when you get into commissioning and startup. So it's really starting this whole commissioning and startup thought process early in the project planning phases, right? In those FEL phases. Then we want to align engineering, procurement, construction, startup, to what the requirements are from a commissioning and startup standpoint. And then the last thing is to kind of streamline any of that handover to operations as much as possible. All right. So that's kind of the continuum, right? We went from our, how do we feed the pipeline of opportunities to the PDRI, to then, which is measuring our front end loading activities. And then we went into our construction readiness to say, are we ready to mobilize to the field? And then once we're in the field, are we assured that we're actually, working together as a cohesive team? And that's the project health indicator. and then making sure we've got commissioning and startup well planned so that we hand it over to operations as efficiently as possible. So I am going to open it up for questions at this point.
And we have lots.
Oh, geez.
Okay, our first question. Will the capital efficiency tool be an assessment type of tool similar to PDRI or construction readiness assessment?
So I was told not to give too much information in this session about it, but yes, it will be. It'll be a tool that is kind of a measurement. Have you evaluated the right set of criteria when putting your portfolio together? But yeah, you'll see a lot of that at the annual conference when it's rolled out. But yes, it will be that type of tool.
Lovely. Should the CRA assessment attended by the internal project team okay, it says should the construction readiness assessment be attended by the internal project team and construction contractors?
Yeah. So a lot of this depends on your contracting strategy, right? Who's going to do what, but in most cases, you're going to need to assess, if as an example, if you went with an EPC type of an approach, right? EPC lump sum, or doesn't really matter, EPC reimbursable, but that contractor who you've hired to do that is going to be responsible for procurement, right? And the detailed engineering and so on. So they've got to be part of the assessment, right? If you're going to support them in that way. If you've broken it up in a different way, if you're doing procurement, right, then yeah, you're going to probably need to get your own internal resources, because a lot of these things are about engineering deliverables, procurement deliverables. So it depends on your overall strategy on who's going to do what, and then it's related to the yes, and then obviously to answer the questions, you'll need to have them as part of the assessment.
And then there's a follow on there. What do they do if the bid's not final and they don't have a selected contractor? Would you then just get an internal person then to assist?
Well, I mean, part of the, and again, I'm not sure I understand the question 100%, but part of the question is, are you, from a contractual standpoint, are you at the point where you can, move into execution? And if you haven't selected your execution contractor yet, that would be a problem, I would think, right? So I don't know if I'm interpreting the question correctly, but I think you need to make sure that somebody's been selected to actually execute the work.
Yep, fair enough. Okay, and I believe this is still related to the same tool, construction readiness assessment, but the question came in, who fills out this very subjective survey? You may have already covered that.
Yeah, so it is a facilitated effort, right? And what we were trying to structure here is that the owner, if you want to create an owner's assurance team, these are some of the tools that team could use. So they're going to come in as an independent appraiser, right? With no preconceived notions, and do a cold eyes assessment, and that this applies to all these tools, by the way. And if you don't have an assurance team, then that's where people like us come in, and you can ask us to, a Pathfinder type individual to come in and be that independent. But the ultimate goal here was to say, very simply, any owner organization could have their own internal assessment or assurance group and implement these 5 tools pretty quickly with internal resources. But not part of it. Shouldn't be the project manager of the team on any of these tools, because it's just, there's way too many biases that come into play when you're day-to-day working on that project. You want to have somebody from the outside.
Too close to it. Okay, shifting over to the project health indicator, this question comes in from our friends at Marathon. Can we have a project team each evaluate individually and then bring the scores together to hopefully get more honest and less? I'm sorry, I lost here.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying, is that, instead of like a facilitated effort, you actually have each individual kind of assess. It's very similar to the alignment thermometer that CII developed, right? You can actually go and ask each individual, their comfort level with each of the criteria, and then you kind of, and you can do it that way. So the short answer to that question is yes. Sometimes it's good to have a facilitated session. Sometimes it's good to do it independently. It depends on the culture of your team, and if you think that if you have too many people that are overbearing, you may not want to do it as a group, right? Mm-hmm. You may want to do it separately. But if you have a good cohesive team, then it usually is okay to do it as a group.
And then there's a follow-on question to that first part. Does the tool facilitate this somehow? So does the tool facilitate bringing the scores together?
Yes, because they're all, I mean, they're standard questions across the, the different focus areas. Does it do it? Because I know like the project health indicator, or I'm sorry, the alignment thermometer that I was talking about before, it allows in the tool, individual 1, individual 2, individual 3 score and so on. I don't think the project health indicator does that, but it's very easy to take, individual scores and then just like do an average combination after that.
Okay. So I have another question. How does the construction readiness differ from schedule constructability?
Well, so first of all, the CRA is a tool, right? So it's a independent assessment. One of the things that it will look at or look for is, how well the schedule's been developed. Is it integrated with, things like your commissioning and startup and so on. So one of the things that it will evaluate is the schedule readiness as well, right? So it'll look for resource loading. It'll look for or ask for those things. So, but in addition to that, it also is looking for all these other things. They're asking questions about, procurement status, engineering status, those types of things. Site status. Or is the site ready for mobilization? So it goes above and beyond just looking at kind of schedule input. I hope I interpreted that correctly.
I think so. Will the project health indicator help me find where my plan is lacking in real time and adjust? For instance, if my quality plan isn't working well, could I adjust it?
So it'll identify gaps, right? That's for sure. Now, will it say that it's definitely the quality plan versus, maybe it's a resource issue, maybe it's an alignment issue or so on? That is still part of what you'll have to do from an assessment standpoint. So it's not going to say, okay, you have to fix your quality plan. That may be part of it. If the answers to the questions kind of pinpoint a quality issue, but it might be above and beyond that. And that's part of what the facilitator has to do, is to make sure that you're looking at a cross, the information may overlap, and it may be more than one issue that is causing a deficiency somewhere.
Yeah, okay. So how can one access the CII tools discussed in these last 2 days?
Jenny, your question.
So if you are a CII member, you'll need a CII login. If you don't have one, you can access that from our homepage at construction-institute.org. If you go up to the top right, you'll see add an account or login. If you're with a member company and you don't have a login, just click on add an account. It'll pull down a quick registration form. Once you complete that, we'll auto-generate you access to the knowledge base. So you'll find these tools in the CII knowledge base. If you just go into the search field there and type in any of these tools, it'll take you directly to the publication. If logged in, you can open and access any pubs or tools. Now, if you're not a CII member, I can help with that. If you're not a CII member, then you can purchase these on TechStreet, TechStreet. If you just do a Google of TechStreet and CII Construction Readiness Assessment or CII Project Health Indicator, something should come up that'll take you straight to that website. And you can purchase those. Most of our tools are at or around $200 for non-members.
Okay. Which is, and that's a so you buy the, excuse me, the construction readiness, for $200, let's say, then you can use it on every project. It's not a project by project type of a purchase.
Correct, correct. Okay, another question coming in. What is the qualification or competency needed for a person to administer these tools?
Great question, right? So one is, you can follow it just as a checklist, right? And say, okay, I'm going to ask these questions, and whatever the team says, I'm going to put down. We believe it takes more than that, right? So, as if you were going to create your internal project assurance team as an owner, a lot of times what organizations do is they put their most senior people in those roles. Now, you might say, well, that's taken away, maybe my most senior project manager that is, I want to execute one project. The theory is that if you can have these individuals be on your assurance team, they're sharing their knowledge, their lessons learned across all the projects, right? So it's almost like a career development ladder that, you move up from a project engineer to a project manager, and maybe small projects to large projects. And then ultimately, you're in the project assurance role. That's the traditional way of kind of staffing this. And with that comes, the experience, the knowledge, and so on, that, what you're looking at, like if you're asking for that resource loaded schedule I was talking about, that what that looks like, and that you can actually look at the schedule and it makes sense. We've seen others that are just kind of follow the questions, and if somebody says, yeah, I have that, and they just mark it down. We believe it's a little bit more than that. And whether it's that senior level position or not, the person that is actually facilitating these tools should have a very in-depth knowledge of projects, right? And a lot of times that some people think, okay, I'm an engineer, I've done a lot of engineering work, but also they need to have field experience, because a lot of these, especially the construction readiness assessment, the health indicator, and so on, you need to know how things occur in the field. And again, what we see in the industry is a lot of times, a lot of the engineering folks don't get the opportunity to gain that construction knowledge. And there's one of the disconnects that we have in the industry. So should be pretty experienced individuals that are facilitating the efforts.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Do you offer templates for success factors and indicators of achievements, or does the organization and project team have to develop them for each project?
I'm not sure exactly. So, when you look at the construction readiness assessment, just use that as an example. If you remember the spider diagram, right, it had a target that you were trying to hit for, what the research team indicated as, the metrics that would constitute a good environment for success. So if that's what you're talking about, that's embedded in some of these tools. Like the PDRI has a target of roughly 200 for full project authorization. Now, if you want to set different targets, either more mature or less mature or however, you can do that. But in most of these tools, there is a recommended target for what healthy might look like, whether that's a healthy PDRI score or a healthy project indicator, because of those dials that we talked about. So there are some target metrics. Whether you want to customize those or not for your specific company or project, you can do that, but that would be a company specific type of activity.
Fair enough. Thank you for all of those answers. I think we did get a chance to cover every question that we received, so well done. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for your interest in our webinars. Our next webinar is on June 5th. It's looking deeper into the the collaboration between AWP, that's Advanced Work Packaging Tools, and Lean concepts. So we continue to explore those two and bring those together where possible. So this next webinar on June 5th will be another peek into that collaboration. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Steve, for your expertise yet again. I hope you guys found this very valuable, and reach out if you'd like any more information on any of these tools. enjoy the rest of your evening, afternoon,
Thanks, Anna.
morning, wherever you are.
That's
Thank
don't forget about the annual conference, and
And the
that QR
candles.
code will get you there.
We look forward to seeing you there in August. Thanks, Steve.
All righty. Bye-bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.